So starting from the introduction, what do we mean when we talk about cash flow management? First of all, we need to establish the fact that, like we all say, cash is king. Even in our personal life, our cash, you can't move, you can't do anything. If you have family, you can support your family. At an individual level, the desires of your heart will not be met if you do not have cash. So one key element of flow management is to establish the fact that cash is extremely important and extremely key in every life or the life of every business. So when we talk about cash flow movement, basically what we are referring to is that what are the elements of the business entity that we run as leaders of our organizations and businesses? What are the elements that are actually moving in and out of the organization? What are the moving parts of the organization? And for that matter, in relation to cash, do we have enough of cash resources, or we do not have enough in running our businesses? All right. Some books put it as the movement of money in and out of the organization or of the business. And they continue to say that this is not revenue or this is not sales, right? Your ability to broker a deal does not necessarily mean that you have cash to run your business. Having brokered a deal or having sold that good or service to your client does not necessarily translate to cash until you receive the cash. So it is very important that cash flow management take cognizance of some of these things, right? Companies have a whole lot of activities, like I mentioned earlier on. Then to manage these resources prudently would establish how sustainable the business will be, not just for today, but going into the future. And for that matter, like I mentioned, the essence and the importance of cash flow management cannot be overemphasized. There's a research by Forbes that actually mentioned that over 69% of business leaders today stay awake thinking about cash flow problems. Why? Because they recognize the importance of cash, and for that matter, cash management in their business. Having given that background, you look at some of the key objectives that we return to. I think Ajoba has actually given us, quite enough details as to why and what the objectives are for today. So I'll just leave it there. But I'll pause to talk a bit about working capital in relation to cash flow management or cash management for that matter. When we talk about working capital, pretty much often you find business leaders confusing cash flow management and working capital. They are two separate things, right? They are inversely related at some point, and they complement each other at some point as well. When you talk about working capital basically is a total amount of capital invested in the business, okay, to be able to help in the operating cycle or in the operations of the business on day-to-day basis, right? The accountant will say it is your current assets minus your current liabilities. But for us as business managers or business owners, it's purely the investment, the capital investment that you are putting in your business to enable you run on a day-to-day basis, basically. Then that's what working capital means. And I talked about the fact that working capital has certain relationship with cash flow management. Your ability to manage this relationship very well will determine how your cash flow or the relevance of your cash flow over the life of the business, right? So what do I mean by this relationship, or how is this relationship established? I give two scenarios here. If you run a business, okay, for example, let me take two retail business, for example. You have two retail business dealing in the same thing. They all sell possibly toys for kids, right? They have what you call inventory, where they're actually buying the toys from some supplier and stocking it over time, right? And here, they all sell to the same market. They operate in the same market for that matter. Price in terms of margins, in terms of the profitability of the business is same to them, right? However, the two entities or the two retail business will decide to manage this differently. And their ability to manage this is what you call working capital or capital invested in the business and how it is managed, right? So back again to our story and the scenario I'm giving. you have two retail entities. One decides that when they take the stock from their suppliers, because they are worried about their credit image and the fact that they don't want to be seen as non-credit worthy in that sense, immediately they receive the stock. What they do is that they pay out front, right? Once they do that, bear in mind, you're actually paying upfront, you're actually putting cash away. What it means basically is that cash is leaving the business, and for that matter, your liquidity will be squeezed. Now, also, the other bit that you are doing as a business, it's also holding high inventories, because what you are doing there is giving their customers a longer period, let's say 3 months duration, to pay back for their stocks or their sales, the item that they sell to their customers. Once this happens, okay, you pay upfront, it takes a longer period for your clients to pay you back. What you are basically doing is that at some point, you'll be cash squeezed, you'll be tight on liquidity. And what is going to happen is that you will need some element of working capital to be able to finance the stock that you are buying and the inventories that you are holding to run your business. When this happens, the implication of your cash flow is that your cash flow will be lower and your working capital will be higher. When working capital is higher, it means that you need some element of financing, which could be either you are borrowing to finance your activities, or you are actually getting some equity invested in the business, and equity possibly by selling part of your business through shares to get capital injection into your business. The other scenario is where another company in that same business environment decides that, look, for me, I rather engage my suppliers and actually stick with them for a longer supply term. So you deliver the stock, I pay you over a certain period of time, let's say 3 months once again, right? And I also don't need to hold that stock. Basically, what I want to do is that I'll just actually, through analysis, possibly identify how much I would possibly sell on a day-to-day basis. And I'll just hold that same amount or that quantity of stock over that period. However, my client should be paying me cash immediately I sell to them. Once this happens, right, basically what the business is doing is that if you listen to my scenario carefully, you will notice that they are getting cash upfront, but they are delaying payment to suppliers and also holding just a limited amount of stock that they will need on day-to-day basis, just to be able to meet the demands that they are getting on day-to-day basis. The ability to extend the supplier terms in terms of how quick or how slow or how fast they are paying their suppliers will lead to lower working capital requirements, and for that matter, high cash flow, high cash resources available to the business. When this cash resources is available to the business, remember, as a business, they can either decide to either invest this cash, or if they are shareholders that they need to even pay dividend to, they can deploy some of these resources into paying dividend. And shareholders eventually will be happy with the operation of this particular business. So in terms of cash flow management, basically what I'm trying to say here is that, yes, you need to understand working capital, but working capital has some relationship with cash flow management, and your ability to understand the moving part of your business and how it impacts your working capital vis-a-vis how it actually influences your ability to stay in business over a longer or sustainable future is very important. And your ability to stay in business over a sustainable future is cash flow management. In terms of practice, how do we actually undertake cash flow management relative to businesses? All right. And once again, one thing I would want to highlight here is that when you talk about working capital basically gives you just a snapshot view of the position of the company at any given time. What cash flow gives you is the cash flow gives you the snapshot view of the company, how healthy the company is, and also not just that, but also gives you a futuristic view of your business over a certain period of time, which working capital doesn't give you. You would have to actually build historical performances to be able to establish the trend of your working capital. but cash flow can give you, even before the event happens, what is likely to happen to your cash resources and how you would need to fund these cash resources into the future. How do we undertake cash flow management? Cash flow management is very important, and it's very important that we do this on day-to-day basis and also stretch it to cover the long-term objective of the business. Pretty much often for very good businesses and people who understand the relevance of cash flow management, what they do is that they tie the cash flow management of the business to their strategic goal or objective of the business over the period. What am I saying? I'm saying that if you have a 5-year, for example, strategic plan, it is important to tie your cash flow to that 5-year strategic plan. Let the activities in that strategic plan reflect your cash flow view. And more especially when we tie it back to crisis management. What it basically means is that you stay ahead of the curve, everybody else is behind. And by the time you're actually hit with this unforeseen risks or unforeseen events, you've actually built enough resources to be able to withstand that, I might say, right? So on a day-to-day basis, how do we actually undertake a cash flow management activity in our businesses? First and foremost, you need to understand, or you need to obtain, first and foremost, your cash positions. And when I say cash position, for most of us, our cash positions as a business are the cash balances on our bank account. It is very important that on a day-to-day basis, you understand clearly where your position is or what balances you have on your account. Once you've gotten this balance, you can design a simple spreadsheet where you actually input the balance in terms of what you have. You call it opening balance. And I said, as we go into the presentation, I will show you an illustration of how you can actually go about this. Once you get the balance, ensure that you update this spreadsheet with all the necessary details in terms of the immediate items that you know, which is going to happen, right? And clearly see how it is actually going to land you in terms of how you're going to close the day in terms of your cash resources. Don't forget, once again, we are talking about cash flow management, and cash flow is synonymous to your cash position or your cash resources as a business. So where would your cash resources be at the end of the day, right? That would determine also the kind of decision you take by close of business or before close of business. You can stretch this activity over a number of days. Like I mentioned, for very proactive business, they tie it up to their strategic plan and they monitor it on day-to-day basis. In Absa, likewise, that is what I do. Over a period, I know clearly what, for example, the bank's funding needs are, what decisions I would need to take when I get there. How do I even plan towards getting there, right? So it's very important that once you have this information, you can actually span it over a period of time to look at it. And typically, I might say here that if you are looking at spreading your cash flow to tie back to your strategic plan, remember, when we talk about, for example, the time horizon should be short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Short-term basically has to do with from day 1 to 3 months, right? And medium-term in terms of cash flow management is from 3 months to 1 year. Beyond 1 year to 3 years, we say you are in a long-term position, right? So as a business, at least your activities should tie back to this lining as much as possible, right? Having done that, having updated your cash flow on daily basis, the next thing you will want to know is to update the cash flow in terms of forecast. So today, I assume that I close at X position. How does it influence my activities for tomorrow? How do you know your activities? Your activities are actually informed by your discussions with all the various functions in the organizations and the relative activities that they are going to undertake over a certain period of time. Like I say, for smaller business or SMEs, it's advisable that you do this at least over a 3-day or 5-day period. You know clearly what is going to happen in your business, right? So once you get this information, you put it into your cash flow, and it is not information as to we are going to hire X number of people and it ends there. But if you are going to hire X number of people, how does it translate into cash? How does it impact our cash resources as a business, right? And those are the elements that the cash flow deals with. The cash flow actually monetizes the activities of the business. If you are going to undertake an advert in terms of trying to woo more customer loyalty, how much is it going to cost you? That advert, the monetization of that advert should be what you're actually capturing in your cash flow. And it's also important that once you've been able to actually establish your daily cash flow and forecast it over a period of time, you review this on day-to-day basis, like I have already mentioned. What kind of information are we putting in our cash flow in terms of first principle? In terms of first principle, you should know clearly where you are sourcing your information from. Like I have already mentioned, as a business leader, as a cash flow manager, you need to touch base with all the various stakeholders in the organization or functions in your organization and understand clearly what you are doing, the relevance of what you are doing, and monetize it into your cash flow. Also, have a view of all your bank account and transactions that are actually hitting your bank account, and because that is where your cash resources sit, and that actually informs the kind of decisions you take as well. For some bigger companies, they have what you call a treasury management system, and this actually helps in managing their cash flow. It actually way of feeding their bank accounts to this particular platform. So once they open at a click of a button, everything is updated or populated, and they can clearly see immediately the kind of decisions or activities that would have to be undertaken in terms relative to managing the cash flow, be it needing capital injection, be it reinvesting the additional or surplus cash that has been generated by the business. I can't overemphasize that it is very important that you review your cash flow on day-to-day basis to reflect the actual activities happening in the business on day-to-day basis. On the next slide, what I want to do is to take us through how we can simply build a cash flow tool in managing our cash flow in our organizations, right? Simple tool you can use here is Excel. Once you have an Excel spreadsheet, you should be able to build a simple tool in managing your cash flow, right? So if you're all with me on the slide 6, clearly you will see that I have actually provided on day-to-day basis for the next 5 days of this particular business, call it Sam & Co. Associates, right? What is actually happening in the business, right? And these are typical things that happens in almost every business. So they have their opening balance, which is their cash positions at the bank, and then the various items in terms of the receivables and the payables or the payouts that the business needs to do on day-to-day basis. So on day one, for example, Sam and Associates open with 85 cedis or $85, whichever currency you want to use, right? In terms of movement in your organization, they have cash from sales, which is 10, either $10 or 10 cedis or 10 pounds, whichever one you are comfortable with. And then the interest receipt. On day one, they do not have anything relative to interest receipt. So their total receipts in terms of receivables comes to 60 Ghana cedis or $60 or 60 pounds, right? On day one, do we have any obligation as a business in terms of payout that the business must do? Yes, Sam and Associates have £150 relative to tax that they need to pay, right? But then there's the catch. So you take the opening position or opening balance of Sam and Associates, it's 85. You add up the 60 in terms of receivables, which is coming in. That's cash that the business is receiving, right? And then you net the tax payment or the tax obligation for day one out of it. And you realize that cash flow in terms of cash activities, right, is impacted negatively. So 60 taken out to the 150, which will bring years to a net cash flow position of $90 or £90 or 90 cedis. The cash available to the business is only 85. In this situation, the company has a shortfall of $5 or £5 that they need to fund. How do we fund this? If we have actually done our cash flow prior to this day, we would have actually recognized the fact that we have a shortfall that we need to finance, and how we are going to finance it, the business leaders or the cash flow manager would have to actually propose or tell the business, right? Come to day 2, we opened our balance. We opened the business with a negative position of £10, right? Our receivables ended up at £98. We have another obligation to our supplier, which is 36, right? If we are netting our obligation from our receivables, right, our cash flow then comes to 62. However, we actually started the day with a short position or a negative variance position of £10. Once we net it out of this cash flow position of 62, we come to £52, and that becomes our closing balance. And we do this for so on and so forth, and we can actually stretch it over a month, over a year, or quarterly, or annual, or semi-annual basis, depending on how you want to actually strategize as a business to take care of this. I have actually put some pointers there that if you are actually doing this, you would need to take into account. One of them that should all departments identify any additional item that may take place within the forecast horizon. So basically what we are saying is, like I have mentioned, it is very important that as a cash flow manager, you don't sit in your small corner to do this. There are people that are actually undertaking operational activities in the business, and it is important that you touch base with all of them on regular basis to understand what is happening in their space. Whatever is happening in their space, for those that can be monetize it and put it in the cash flow to actually inform your decision, be it funding or be it investment going into the future, right? Like I mentioned, once you've done with your cash flow, you've been able to tell what your cash flow looks like, the position of your cash flow. Now, what kind of decisions do you take? Assuming your cash flow shows a negative variance position, assuming it shows a positive variance position, what are some of the decisions that as a business manager or as a business leader you need to do? First and foremost, I will start with dealing with a negative cash flow position. And to be honest with you, it's not pleasant when you have to finance a negative cash flow position, more especially during crisis. But like I'm saying, we are doing this from a first principle, and we will look at how we will do this over a crisis to understand how we can actually stay afloat into the future, right? Typically, in managing cash flow basically helps businesses to reduce the liquidity risks inherent of their business. Liquidity risks might sound too much of a big word, but basically what it means is that you reduce your cash, the risk to your cash, and actually increase your ability to fund your obligations through your own generated cash resources without necessarily having to fall on a third party where you might not necessarily, or you might not be lucky enough to generate that resources or get that resources in adequate or sufficient quantity to finance your business activity, right? So cash flow actually showing a short position, or cash flow forecast showing a short position and how we finance it. One of the best ways to actually do this, like I mentioned in the scenario of the working capital bit, is that if possible, delay payment to your suppliers. If you already have a pre-agreed terms with suppliers and it cannot be renegotiated, then please stick to the pre-agreed terms and pay. But if it's possible to actually re-engage your suppliers to understand, and honestly speaking, what happens basically here is that you need to be very open and honest with your suppliers for them to understand the shape and form of your business. Once that happens, I think suppliers usually will hear you out and possibly defer it over a certain period. But if possible, delay payment so that actually you can meet your immediate obligation that are extremely or important or critical to undertake. A typical example that we saw in our cash flow illustration is, for example, you have a tax obligation which is regulatory. If you have to delay payment to suppliers to meet tax obligation, which will not lead to other ramifications for the business, it is important that you touch base with your suppliers and renegotiate terms and use the resources to pay tax. And when you have enough, or when you've generated enough from your receivables, you go back to your suppliers to pay them. Another thing you can do also is to fall on your bankers. If it's possible and an overdraft is permitted on your account, you can actually walk to your bank and ask that you draw down on that overdraft if possible. If it's not, and you have to go through credit processes to have it done, it is very vital that you do this ahead of time, because your cash flow will reveal when you have shortfall and how you, and when you have shortfall, which needs to be funded, and the decision to fund it will be very critical. And for that matter, if you have to fund this shortfall with overdraft, it's important that you go ahead of time to your business or your banker, to secure some funding. If you have multiple accounts as a business, it's advisable that you actually do what you call pooling or notional pooling. Pool all your business, your balances into one account, possibly at the end of the day, to consolidate the position, to understand clearly where you are as a business. Once that is done, you see how much is available to the business and what use you can deploy this, or how you can use this to finance your shortfall. If you are cash rich, or you've been able to establish from your forecast that you have surplus resources in terms of cash, for me as a banker and as a cash flow manager in a bank, and a very well-known bank like Absa, I will advise that cash should not sit idle doing nothing. Deploy that cash, even if it's on overnight or what we call day-to-day basis. Just deploy that cash to earn something. Go and negotiate terms with your bankers to earn something small on that money. Don't leave it on the bank account doing nothing, because a typical current account do not earn anything for businesses. So go and negotiate and deploy that resources, even if it's on a day-to-day basis, to earn something for the business. What are some of the challenges that cash flows tend to face, or cash flow managers tend to face in managing cash flows? Basically, what I'm going to do here is that I'll highlight a few of the challenges and the solutions that we actually deploy in actually managing these challenges that are identified with cash flow management. One of the key challenges in terms of cash flow is related to managing account receivables of businesses. For most businesses, in a normal time, they tend not to worry about goods that they've sold, where customers are owing them and they need to pay back. But for a cash flow manager, I must say that you don't wait till crisis. Your ability to manage this well and make sure that you have cash or sufficient cash to the business is very critical. What this does to the business is that, like I mentioned, in how we finance either a surplus or a shortfall in our cash flow, that if you have sufficient cash sitting down, you can deploy and earn some interest on the cash. It shouldn't be sitting with your customers for them to take forever in paying back to the business, right? So your ability to manage your receivables is critical. Outstanding payments are one of the biggest challenges that business face. Like I mentioned, 60% of invoices are paid late. And this is actually a research that has been established. Small businesses, for example, take 72 days in receiving payment for goods and services that they've provided, even though they have serviced their customers with the necessary invoice or payment advice. This can actually break down the business or break the back of the business. So it is important that we manage this carefully as business leaders. Many businesses also, like I mentioned earlier, do not understand the relevance of managing their cash receivables in a timeous manner. For that matter, they sell goods and services and they leave it to the customers to pay them, because for some people, it's either they don't understand the importance of it, or they worry about the fact that, especially for small and medium-sized businesses, they worry about the fact that going to chase customers for cash might lead to the customers actually leaving them and patronizing another service provider or business. And for that matter, they leave it to the customers to actually pay back on their own time. These things are detrimental to the business. And it's important that we manage it carefully and wisely. How do we go about doing this, right? One of the significant ways of doing this in terms of getting paid services provided is getting cash upfront or taking deposit or part payment for the service before you even deliver. When that happens, it injects capital into the business. You can even use part of this capital to actually secure the services that you need to render to this particular client. You can also do this by sending invoices in good time. Immediately service is provided, send an invoice, notify the client, set reminders on your PCs, your phones every day. If you have to push through with a call, follow up with a call. But look, you owe me, you need to pay, I need a cash to run my business. There are in modern day business, there are other platforms like digital platforms that you can deploy in getting your receivables into the business. One of the significant ones in Ghana now is the mobile money channels. You can actually take advantage of this digital platform to have customers pay you through these platforms. I will jump into the next problem, which is the managing payment, right? As I mentioned earlier, if you are holding stock or you have supplier obligations that you actually need to finance, it is important that as a business, you do this in a very prudent manner. Prudent in the sense that if you can extend supplier terms, it is very critical, right? And as a business also, don't concern yourself so much with embarking on what you call capital expenditures like office infrastructures and marketing campaigns that are over elaborative and expensive to the business, right? More especially during crisis. You need to make sure that you are getting value for money when you need to do some of these things, because you're actually going to expense cash, and expensing cash will impact your cash flow. So in doing some of this or undertaking some of these activities, it's important for you to actually do a cost-benefit analysis of them to understand the benefit that the business tend to derive from this, if possible, within the shortest possible time. I would also want to talk about debt financing. Some businesses already are heavily geared or levered in terms of debt. They are sitting on a significant amount of obligations to their bankers. It is important that as a business, one of the ways you can actually manage your cash flow to reduce liquidity to the business is to consolidate your debt, right? If possible, don't borrow from multiple sources, if possible, right? If market conditions change, if interest rate situations in your business environment changes, it is important that you walk back to your business and renegotiate terms in terms of refinancing to release liquidity. Over time, like I mentioned, a lot of especially within the SME space, you realize that there's a lot of trust that business owners entrust their employees with. And for that matter, employees are allowed to handle cash on their own. Basically, or more often than not, what happens is that you hear stories of employees running away with cash or resources that are due the organization. One way to avoid this, basically, like I mentioned earlier, to deploy automated platforms or automated systems to actually take payables from your customers without having to have your employees interfering in some of these receivables, so they can focus more on the core business and the operational side of the business. You can also do regular audits in terms of inventory checks, in terms of accounting checks, to ascertain the activities of the business and whether there are any malfeasance relative to employees that needs to be accounted for, right? So talking about cash flow management, Basically, these are some of the key challenges and solutions outlined in managing the challenges in handling of cash or cash flow in businesses. Having said this, we will just dive into why we are doing this today, right? How we can manage cash flow during crisis. Right. What I have done here is to give some background to COVID-19, which has actually impacted the business environment today. I wouldn't waste too much time on this. I just would want to highlight a few things. When you look at the global operating environment today in terms of businesses, you would notice that basically every sector of the globe, in terms of businesses, in terms of livelihood, in terms of even individuals, what we do in our homes, we've been impacted by this COVID-19, right? More significantly, IMF, World Bank are saying that growth relative to businesses and economies will shrink significantly. For example, if you look at Africa, our growth projection has been estimated to come sub 1% or max 1.1% thereabout, according to the UN Economic Commission for Africa. Locally, even in Ghana, our growth outturn, it's estimated to come sub 2%, around 1.4, 1.5%, from a target of about 7%, significant, right? Clearly, this nobody, no individual, no country, no economy is insulated from this particular activity or particular event called COVID. All businesses, various sectors, we have seen aviation come to a halt completely. We have seen hospitality and tourism come to a halt completely. We have seen other social events and organizers also going out of business, right? But trust me, some of these entities are also operating within the same sector. The first thing you need to ask yourself here is, how did they do this? From where I sit as a practitioner, I can tell for a fact without even checking books to say that it is purely due to prudent cash flow management. Once you are managing your cash flow prudently, you would have enough cash resources, even when you are impacted by such events, to be able to manage your obligation and, for that matter, stay in business. Because for every crisis that happens, there's always an opportunity. There's always a silver lining of opportunity in there. For example, if I should give you an example of silver lining in crisis, for example, if you are cash healthy today as an aviation or as an hospitality business, right? Some hotels are actually closing down completely. If you are cash rich, you can actually buy these hotels off at a very cheaper rate or at a cheaper cost to your business, because you can have the world without, and you can have the capability because you've managed your cash resources well to do this even in time of crisis, right? But going into strategies to manage cash flow during a time like this, one of the things that businesses would have to do, and here there are quite a number of them, but I'll pinpoint a few because of time consideration. I'll just pinpoint a couple of them. We run through. If we read through and there are any questions, I'm ready to take them as well. One of the strategies that businesses can do first and foremost to develop and maintain a robust financial forecast. It is very, very important. We talked about the fact that from introduction, I mentioned that working capital basically gives you a snapshot position of your business, right? However, cash flow management gives you not just a snapshot, but a futuristic view. It gives you a long-term picture of how the business is likely to look at, having actually factored in all the various points in terms of crisis, in terms of changes within the operating environment as well, right? So it is very important that you develop and maintain a very robust financial forecast. Your ability to do this very well will determine how viable or how vital the strategies of the business will be and how sustainable the business will be over time. And in doing this particular financial forecast, it's important that you tie your activities as a business, like I mentioned earlier, to the strategic objective of the business in terms of the functional areas and the entire business as an entity, right? And it's also important that business owners understand the various moving parts in the business, not just to the business, but even the operating environment. If you are operating, say, in the US, what is happening in the US today? How is it going to influence your decisions as a business? If you are operating in Ghana, what are some of the happenings in Ghana? What are the business risks that are likely to hit your organization? You need to understand this and build it or factor them into your cash flow forecasting as well. Right. So that actually talks about identify the key forecast risks and develop appropriate responses to deal with it. So as I mentioned, it's important that you understand what is happening in your operating environment and develop the appropriate strategies or responses to this. A typical example in Ghana, for example, that you will find out is interest rates are coming down purely because of this COVID situation. The fiscal space, in the monetary space, there's been a lot of liquidity that has been released into the system just to make sure that as an economy which is dominant in the SME space, we have most of these SMEs which are the engine to our growth, stay in business and not go under. For this reason, there's a deliberate effort to have interest rates go down. As a business, how do you actually factor this in your decision making? How do you actually consider this even in your financing activity to make sure that you stay ahead of business when things turn around, possibly a year or two or down the line, if the COVID situation to ease up a bit? We've talked about the receivables and how we need to manage them. We talked about capital investment. As we are seeing in today's global economy, almost every facet of it is impacted, regardless of what you do. When that happens, there's a domino or ripple effect on all the businesses that are down the chain. So take it from China. This COVID started from China, as the narrative have it, right? China happens to be one of the biggest supply hubs in the world. Today, a country like Ghana is impacted significantly because SMEs, for example, who depend on China for their stocks are unable to get stock to actually stock up their shops and their businesses to operate, regardless of how much cash you have. So your ability to understand that this is how the COVID situation is going to impact my business. This is how the crisis that we face in. What do I need to do as a business? Do I need to stock up more? And my ability to be able to stock up more in cash flow in the past, right? My ability to stock up more is my ability also to depend on assets, be it equity or debt, to finance the activities of the business. Do I have what it takes to be able to call on a bank and say, this is what I see happening to my business in the next 3 months down the line? How are you able to help me? All this will be dependent on ability to understand how the environment is changing and what are the various moving parts or factors that are actually affecting your business, regardless of where you sit or regardless of your geographical location. What are some of the ways that businesses can actually shore up capital? Once again, we've talked about some of this thing. I'll just highlight a couple of and the rest. Maybe if you have any question, you can actually explain it. There are myriad solutions, and basically what I've done is give you a very wide spectrum of solutions business follow. And just to put it in here, just to chip in here that all the solutions, trust me, Absa Ghana, it's ever ready to support you should you need any of those solutions. So in risk management, for example, as a business, having understood what is going on currently, if you are somebody who is dependent on, say, FX, in terms of foreign exchange, where you are actually buying or securing dollar to be able to import goods and services to supply, what are some of the decisions do you need to take? What are some of the things that you need to understand here, right? So if you depend heavily on FX, you should understand that globally, there's tight liquidity on, for example, on the foreign exchange front. How is it going to impact the spot? Spot is basically everyday, your day-to-day buying of dollar, for example, from your local currency or whatever currency that you have that you need to exchange for the other currency, right? Having understood that, what are some of the decisions that as a business you need to take? Do I buy the FX today? Do I buy it tomorrow? Absa, for example, provide a myriad of solutions in respect of this. They have what you call FX forward, where you would have to go into the decision making today, where you take the FX and possibly pay in the future at a rate that will be favorable to the business, in the sense that if your long-term view is that FX rates are going to go up, you are going to lock in the price today. However, it will be delivered to you in the future at the price that you've actually locked in today. So if you lock in a cheaper rate today with a view that FX rates are going to go up in the future, come future when you need it, you've actually locked in your FX rate today, right? At whatever rate that has been agreed with your financiers. And you get it cheaper than where all the other businesses, for example, are getting it. If you are somebody who is dependent heavily on say, crude, for example, the market in the global market in the crude oil space has tumbled a bit. What is happening basically now is that prices have gone down significantly. And for that matter, people expect that crude prices at the pumps should also go down. If you depend heavily on, for example, crude, what do you need today to make sure that as a business, you are well insulated from what is happening in the global market, right? If you get in touch with Absa, for example, one of the things that they can help you do with what you call hedging, right? Where you'll be insulated from the movement in the price falls or the price hikes in crude today, should you need a crude in future. So you lock in the price today, and in the future when price changes, for example, it goes up, you will be delivered that crude at the cheaper rate that, for example, you've locked today. So it is very important to understand your business and some of the decisions in terms of the solutions that you need. That once you understand the moving part of your business and what you need to do, taking the decision ahead of time, right? You get, for example, funding cheaper in terms of if you need to fund shortfalls in your organization, right? If you have surplus liquidity that you need to deploy, or you have surplus cash that you need to deploy, you would understand clearly when you will need it. If you need it in the future, for example, you can negotiate long-term interest rate, which will be higher than the short-term interest rate, to be able to generate additional earnings from the cash that the business has been able to generate out of the cash flow forecast or view that you've done. Also, if you identify that you have need for working capital, clearly if your working capital activity shows that you have a shortfall or you have assets, and for that matter, you need to finance this asset for profitability purpose in crisis. So bring it home. Let me put an example to this here. Now we are in crisis. There's a shortfall in a lot of stocks. For example, if you look at the health sector, in Ghana, for example, today, we talk about masks. A lot of people are demanding masks to wear around. It's in short supply. Businesses are unable to meet the current demand. As a business, if you have the opportunity to be able to produce this or to get this to put on the market, you can fall on working capital or fall on Absa to finance this for you, so that you'll be able to meet this exigent demand. And for profitability purpose, this injection of working capital into your business is a plus to you because it is positive to the business and you will make enough earnings from it, considering the demand that is out there that needs to be financed. I brought this product here just for the purposes of business leaders to understand that Absa has what you call short-term borrowing. The narrative provides a lot of details on it. Basically, what I'll mention here is that it is a vehicle or an investment vehicle that allows businesses, for example, that today have been impacted by the crisis and for that matter are sitting on the cash and do to deploy the cash and they are sitting on their bank account. As I mentioned, we are flexible enough to, in terms of investment, to make some earnings on it for business. If you need it to even invest as a business, to invest your resources for that 3 days so that you can make some earnings on it. Next, what I would want us to do now is to look at how a typical company survive a crisis situation. And in this particular case study, we will talk about General Motors. General Motors is a manufacturing firm in the United States. In the 2008 financial crisis, it is said that General Motors was one of the companies, or the company which is a company which is outside the financial industry, that was heavily impacted amongst all the other companies. Right? It is described as the biggest casualty in terms of the 2008 financial crisis relating to companies that are outside the financial service industry. What happens to GM? So General Motors basically produce cars, like I mentioned, right? And these cars actually go to retail owners and companies and all. What the financial crisis basically did was to squeeze liquidity out of the system. And this was not just peculiar to America, it was globally. Once liquidity was squeezed or cash was squeezed out of the system, people lost their jobs. Companies could not continue operating, and for that matter, had to close down. We saw even big banks that were seen as so big and could not going under. Right? When this happened, it actually affected the cash flow of individuals and businesses, and especially for individuals that are actually dependent or are actually customers to GM. When this happened, what it meant is that it's a typical situation and a typical case in the US, you find out that most owners of cars actually buy or finance these cars through credit. And the ability to finance this is basically from their income or their earnings. So once their jobs were gone, their cash flows were impacted. Once their cash flows were impacted, their ability to meet the obligations to GM or the financial organization that actually brokered the deal for them in terms of the vehicle purchase were impacted. This situation actually led to GM actually seeing a year-on-year reduction in sales by 30%. And this actually translated into cash flow problem for them. Because what it means is that either two monies that would have come to them would have been lost to this financial crisis by as much as 30%. This created a lot of liquidity problem for the business. The business had to go under. The interesting thing about GM is that GM is somewhat owned by the American government, and the American government had an interest in GM, and for that matter, decided that they will put some liquidity into the company to make the company stay afloat. The concern was that the number of people that the company employs, should they allow them to go home, it would impact even more severely on the economy of America, and for that matter, they wanted them to stay afloat. But the capital injection amounted to no result for GM. As much as almost $20 billion were put into GM by the American government. It still couldn't help the business stay afloat. The business at a point had to file for bankruptcy. When it filed for bankruptcy, it was at that point that additional capital was injected. That's about $30 billion into the business. The point that we need to understand here is that how are we managing our cash flows? Very significant, I keep saying. And your cash flow, your ability to manage your cash flow will determine how you will stay in business during crisis once again. The additional 30 billion came in, and that is what turned GM around. But that said, even with the 30 billion, the business realized that there were things that they need to stop, or there were activities or operating activities of the business that they realized that, look, should we continue the way we are operating, we will not survive the next crisis should we be hit with one. One of the significant decisions of the business leaders then was to actually stop some of their production lines. Some of the brands were actually stopped completely. They stopped producing a brand like Pontiac. They sold Absa to a Dutch company just to stay afloat, to enhance the liquidity or to reboost or reinvest liquidity back or to release liquidity back into the business. When this happened, the company turned around, and one of the significant things they did was to move out of the American market or reduce or presence in the American market, because they realized that the American automobile industry for saturating the American market will lead or will yield very low returns for them as a business. More in the Asian market where their presence was significant, where they see a lot more receivable cash coming in to the business. They also embarked on a new brand identity just to reflect the new face of the organization. Then also, the operations of the business was actually streamlined just to narrow down their touch point. So one of the things they did was to get rid of as much as 40,000 employees in the United States, as much as 40,000 globally, and as much as 13 of their plants were shut down in business to reinject capital to the business. The point basically is that expanding the business in normal times, growing your business in normal times, right? It's very easy because you're in normal times, much often you do not worry much. It looks so fixable, it looks so plugged because cash flow looks so significant. Capital injection looks quite positive. Working capital looks positive. But once you expand, what is going to happen is that should any risks to business happen, you would be impacted. And if you are not careful, you will go under or would have to take some of the hard decisions that GM had to take. In concluding, basically what I want to point out here is that cash flow management should be an integral part of the day-to-day activities of every business. We shouldn't wait till crisis. Why? Because cash generation is the lifeblood of growing business. It's the lifeblood of even existing business and large corporate organizations. And for that matter, the ability to have more of it in crisis is very important. And that determines how sustainable you will be. Crises like COVID would always be around, but your ability to stay ahead, your ability to stay around the curve is dependent on your ability to actually build a resilient cash flow scenarios where you can actually determine, for example, your best case scenario, your worst case scenario in terms of risks to your business during crisis. Cash flow management is very critical to the business, I must say, as to whether the business will yield enough resources or enough value from their activities is dependent on how well they manage their cash flow. I think I will end here and possibly take questions if there are any.
Thank you very much, Sam. Do we have any questions? Please unmute yourself if you want to ask a question and select the raise hand icon and I'll call you. Should you prefer also not to speak, you can send an instant message via the chat function and I will read out your question for you. So Sam is open to questions, or comments, or additions. Dennis has a question. Please introduce yourself and the company you work for before you ask your question.
Okay, I'm Dennis from Norley Design. Okay, so Sam, I wanted to ask a question regarding the Excel for the cash flow. Okay, so in the case where a company works on contract basis, so you don't receive incomes frequently, you don't do sales quickly, how would your Excel look like? Since you can't do it day to day, because probably things don't come in day to day, how would your Excel look like? Thank you.
So thank you very much, Bennett. As I mentioned, it is very important that you understand the moving part of your business, okay? Of the activities that you undertake in your business. Once you understand that, you don't necessarily have to build your cash flow to reflect a day-to-day event when you do not have day-to-day event. It is, if it's every other day, your cash flow should reflect as such that the activities of the business or the movements that are happening within your business in terms of what is going out, if it's people who provided materials to you that you are paying, if you are paying them every 3 days, you should show that in your Excel sheet on every 3 days or every other day, depending on how things are happening in your business. You don't necessarily have to build a day-to-day cash flow if you do not have a day-to-day activity on your business books.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Venice.
Yeah.
And thank you, Sam. Any other questions or comments or suggestions? Sarah?
Okay, so I wanted to find out from Sam. You know, this one of the issues that came up with the fear and panic sales, you know, during just before the lockdown, and in fact, I think it's still continuing, is the fact that suddenly suppliers want to take cash. Okay, they want to take cash for anything you purchase from them. They are no longer giving credit. How do you manage for a small business? How would you manage such a situation? You know, suddenly those who used to extend credit to you are taking cash.
Thank you very much, Bennett. Like I mentioned in my presentation, that in crisis, you realize that businesses and business leaders tend to take decisions that will help them stay afloat. And one of the things they do basically in respect of cash flow management, and that is basically what the suppliers are doing, to either take cash or get an upfront payment for their services or for their wares that they supply to you. What you can do is to understand, first and foremost, the activities that you're undertaking. If you are also stocking to sell, do you have demand on the other side that you believe that if you go and take this particular supplies, you'll be able to sell it as fast as you can to generate enough cash for your business? If that is the case, there are institutions, organizations, for example, Absa is there, where we have a business banking unit that can help you actually generate immediate cash to purchase these resources, right? And then you can onward sell it for cash to be able to pay back the facility that you are getting. So it is important that you understand that flow in your business. If it is that is the case and you just want to survive the current situations, then you need to be very, very careful and cautious about the decision you take today. Either than that, you'll be saddled with debt, or you will go under for the fact that you just want to keep afloat, but you do not have the resources to stay afloat. But really, if like I mentioned, if the demand on the other side is credible and you show for the fact that yes, I have even invoice, just like the suppliers are asking that, look, pay me upfront. The same way you can tell your client, I would need some cash upfront. Maybe give me partial payment. Give me 30% of the fee. Once I'm done, I'll be able to get the resource for you, and then you pay me the difference. Once you do that, right, you can also use the cash that you purchase the resource from your supplier and sell it to the client and generate the cash. Or you go to a finance, maybe this is the invoice I have people who are willing to buy my wares. Okay, maybe you can take the invoice. Those things that financiers do. For example, do some of these things for our business banking clients, right? Take your invoice, what you call fact. So we'll discount your invoice and we give you cash, but we make sure that we receive the payment from your client just to take care of the resources or of the cash that has been injected into your business. So it is, before you take the decision, please understand where you are as a business, really the activities that you are undertaking now, of what importance. Is it just for profitability's sake, or it is for you to stay in business? And are your clients willing to pay upfront or pay some element of it before you take the decision? Either than that, you get yourself banked.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Sam, I think we have no further questions. And so, do you have any last words? Anything?
All I'll say is that as a business, we are always open to support the UK Ghana Chamber of Commerce as a partner. As a practitioner, I'm also available anytime you need me to talk to some of these issues, be it through such channels or in physical.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sam. I believe that this has been a very useful presentation for our participants. There were moments where your connectivity was a bit poor, but I believe that generally we got a good understanding of what you were talking about. And like I said, we will share the slides from your presentation. And on the last slide, I noticed that your contact details are there. And therefore, for those who perhaps may come up with questions or require some clarifications after they've gone through your slides, they will be able to reach out to you later. And we're very, very, very grateful for the knowledge that you've shared with us today. Absa is a founding member of our chamber, and we've always had a very, very good relationship with you. And we are very grateful that you made the time to share your knowledge, your experience, and also the packages that you have on offer at Absa Ghana with our members. Thank you, everyone, and thank you very much, Sam. We're very, very grateful. Thank you.